Maybe you've heard of Tongkat Ali before. Heard Dr. Andrew Huberman talk about it on Joe Rogan a couple of years ago. And I've got a man that can expand on that a lot more. It's Derek from More Plates, More Dates. What's going on, man? And so yeah, I mean, I did a video a couple of years ago as well, kind of breaking it down, kind of going into detail, my experience or my potential reaction to it. And then I actually ended up trying it. And I'll share kind of what happened with me and kind of get some feedback from you. But can you give sort of an overview of Tongkat Ali and what it's typically used for right now?
Yeah, so it has a lot of speculated mechanisms of action, but the one that I feel to be the likely reason why it manipulates testosterone levels so significantly is its effect as it's called a selective estrogen receptor modulator. So similar to some of these pharmaceutical drugs like Novadex, Clomid, some of these drugs work by interacting with the estrogen receptor, and similarly to what we just talked about in the other video about once you start interacting with that receptor, there's agonism and antagonism, which is kind of like stimulation versus I don't even know what the terminology would be in layman's terms, but kind of like the opposite of activation.
Yeah.
Whatever that, opposite word would be for that. But antagonism of receptors whereby you have feedback to your brain or lack thereof entirely, which then can impact upstream to that or downstream what your body does to achieve what it deems to be adequate receptor activation. So if you have estrogen receptors that otherwise have estradiol, which is what testosterone aromatizes into, binding to it, causing transcriptional activity that facilitates neuroprotection, cardioprotection, a bunch of different stuff. If you are then binding to that receptor with something that is modulating it or providing a signal that is not what the body deems to be adequate to achieve physiologic functions in a certain capacity, it might otherwise then tell your brain, hey, we need more estrogen because we're not getting enough estrogen receptor activation as a consequence of this Tongkat Ali acting, or Novadex, or the thing I've seen it compared to directly is tamoxifen, and it being actually as potent in certain studies. Now, I believe these were in vitro assays where it was assessed in potency and compared directly to that, but still, seems to be very, very potent in certain individuals as a estrogen receptor modulator. But basically what it will do is upstream to that in your brain, the hypothalamus, it will signal, okay, we need to make more estrogen. So how do we go about doing that? We increase the output of gonadotropin releasing hormone to the pituitary, and then downstream to that, luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone to go down to the testes to make more testosterone, which will then aromatize into estrogen and then hopefully bind to those receptors and achieve the level of transcriptional activity that we need to fulfill basic functions. But when you start getting in the middle of that with modulation with these kind of synthetic or herbal derived compounds, you can actually kind of manually impede that process and trick your brain into making more testosterone. And it can be a fairly significant effect in certain individuals. And we've seen a decent amount of literature, I would say, for a compound that is otherwise somewhat obscure in terms of its impact on testosterone production and potentially even performance enhancement in some capacity. But it's a very, very nuanced ingredient whereby, because even if you're just increasing testosterone, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing if you're modulating estrogen receptors that you might otherwise need for functions in the body too. So it very much depends on the individual. And this is where testosterone boosters can get a very, very bad rap or a good rap depending on the individual and what specific scenario they would benefit from, or their genetic predisposition, or a myriad of factors. But this is where, they could get demonized, justifiably so, but on the opposite side of the spectrum, for some people, it may have some utility. Yeah. So that's, if you want to stem off of that, I feel like you've done a pretty comprehensive video on Tongkat, right?
Yeah, I mean, so from what I remember, it's been a while since I did that video, but it was sort of a 3 or 4 pronged approach. There was I know there's some potential increases in free testosterone that they noticed in some various studies. There was a decrease in sex hormone binding globulin. There were some interesting changes. It was multiple prong approach. And I remember obviously the estrogen modulation effect kind of the most significant.
I put a link down below for Thrive Market if you want to get some protein snacks. They've got things like chomps, they've got beef jerky, they've got really good things to snack on. But the best part is there's a 30% off discount link. They are a sponsor on this channel. They have been for 5 or 6 years. It's how we create the content that we create and keep going and pay our team and rock and roll. But the best part is you get a discount. That's a 30% off discount link, so you can shop at Thrive Market do your full grocery shopping there. They even have meat and seafood options that are much more sustainable, which is great. Already generally cheaper than the grocery store, and it gets delivered to your doorstep. So 30% off using that link down below for Thrive Market. I'm not saying Thrive Market's gonna fix fatty liver. I am saying they are gonna give you the tools to revamp your lifestyle. And as this video goes on, I think you'll understand more of what I'm saying. So after this video, check out that link down below in the description, get some groceries delivered, and get a $50 free gift as well when you use that link.
And then my experience, sort of as an update, because people have literally emailed me saying, like, I saw your video, like, and you said you were going to try it. My sex drive improved. I felt like my strength improved. I ended up going off of it because my hair started falling out. And I was very surprised that a compound that was that benign, if you would call it that, was doing that.
Yeah.
Okay, this being said, I mean, giving a thoughtful acknowledgement to the fact that during the time I was also doing a lot of very high heat sauna, like 4 or 5 times per week, without wearing what's called a sauna cap, which is like why if you look at like Finnish saunas, they're usually wearing a goofy looking wool cap. It's because the heat can fry your hair. Okay. And that can cause my hair to get, but I was like, this is not something I want to, like, it was coming out in droves. I was like, it's over, right? Like my wife walked into the bathroom and she's like, when did you wash the dogs? I was like, what are you talking about? I was like, I did not wash the dogs. She's like, there's hair everywhere. And I was like, oh, what the heck is going on? So I stopped taking it, and then 2 weeks later it stopped. So that, in my opinion, that was a good thing. It just meant that maybe I needed to decrease the dose, but I kind of panicked and stopped. I hit the panic button, which tells me like all the other effects were so positive. Like sex drive was up, and I stay pretty lean. So like sometimes, like, you know, I have no problem. I'm a man. I'll admit the fact that like when I'm very, very lean, like I have to work to get my sex drive up. Like it's just like what happens when you're really lean. So it's like if I get back up to 7-8%, then things are pumping just fine. But like it fixed that. It was like, you know, within a week. But I pumped the brakes because I got kind of nervous. And I was going to ask you, I was literally going to email you that separately. I was going to actually, or just text you on it. Like, can there be a DHT conversion like with something like that? With something as, okay.
So in addition, estrogen is something that has a big impact on hair follicles too. Okay. So it could have been a result of its modulation of something in the scalp and proportionally changing the, downstream conversion of different ratios in the scalp itself. Because again, the scalp, every organ is going to have its own like unique tissue specific concentrations of hormones. Yeah. And we don't know for sure when you have, like, again, I guess Tongkat might not be selective like a pharmaceutical derived product that was synthetically made to achieve some target endpoint. Tongkat is just like a random herb from nature. Like, I'm highly doubtful it has like specific, like it definitely could, but like tissue specific activity, it could be more broad spectrum, and maybe in the scalp it does. Who knows for sure? Like, we don't really know. It's highly speculative. So you could maybe end up with like estrogen deprivation in your scalp for all we know, which could then have led to, you know, like premature hair fall. Like, we don't actually know for sure. And we don't know if that was androgen, like actual androgenic alopecia, or if it was like a hormone fluctuation induced telogen effluvium episode, because sometimes you might have just like random loss that's triggered by a hormone fluctuation, because that very much is something that would otherwise trigger an episode of, like, again, telogen effluvium is like a shedding phase that is not necessarily indicative of permanent loss. So if you have a significant hormone fluctuation, you could just like lose droves of hair, but then it would eventually come back. So we don't know for sure that it was androgen induced, or which would potentially be permanent via miniaturization of hair follicles, or if it was estrogen deprivation mediated. But yeah, like, it definitely has a very impactful effect, like the fact that your libido went up significantly. Like, obviously, you know, that's an androgen driven thing, especially if estrogen receptors are being manipulated in a way that could otherwise decrease estrogen activity potentially. The likely outcome is testosterone went up fairly significantly, as well as free test, you would imagine, and then downstream of that, DHT definitely going to be higher.
I wonder if I had just stayed on it, if it would have balanced out.
Maybe,
and because and I don't want this to get misconstrued as don't take it because your hair is going to fall out. I see it as quite the opposite. I was like, wow, this was working. Like, it was doing something.
A lot of people think, again, test boosters are, you know, they have a bad rap, they're demonized, but some of them are quite impactful. Like, very few ingredients, but some of them, like Tongkat Ali, can be super impactful. Like, you've seen it yourself as far as what it did to your libido. Now again,
now I kind of want to try it again.
It depends on the person though too, because some people, maybe you don't respond that well to the estrogen receptor modulation component of it, or who knows? It kind of depends on your own scenario. And if you have like top tier testosterone levels, like if you were walking around with a 900 total and you felt amazing, like would it have even made sense for you to have used it? You know, probably not. Like there's more nuance and again, like context that needs to guide your decisions on what you are ingesting. Because some people, they think, for example, Tongkat or some of these things are going to be like the middle ground between nothing and actual steroids, and not the case.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
No, and I mean, with that, like, what are some of the test boosters that are total like garbage? Like, is fenugreek just like a joke? Is Tribulus a joke? Like, what are some of the other ones that are out there that are just total?
And maybe I should provide clarity to my statement as far as between steroids and not. It's not the middle. But again, if you're somebody who otherwise potentially, like for you, you're very much considering the utility of TRT. Like, is that something that should be part of my life? Like for certain individuals that are kind of like on the threshold of not knowing, like I feel like that's where some of these ingredients may have utility to experiment with. Yeah. Because that could be the middle ground of you shutting yourself down and like completely nuking your HPTA to then rely on exogenous testosterone versus a middle ground of something that manipulates it in a more subtle way to enhance natural output. So it actually could be a middle ground for some people, but very, very specific and like context specific. So that's worth noting. But as far as stuff that's complete, fenugreek, from what I saw, from what I remember, it was not very impactful. What else? There was Tribulus. Yeah, that one was pretty hyped up. It does seem to actually, I think if the saponin content is high enough and you actually get like a high quality one, it might do something, but it might be a transient effect.
Wild yam extract was another one.
Yeah. And then there were some other ones too, like D-aspartic acid, I think ended up being as well. I don't know. Some of the ones that you would think move the needle do though, like zinc, magnesium, vitamin D, but those are things that are often, again, this is where supplements, the word supplement, you have to be considerate of the fact that these are, if they're helpful, it's probably because you're deficient, not because the thing is actually like, you know, super physiological magnesium makes you produce more tests. Like, no, like don't go overdose on magnesium and zinc to try and get like better levels. Like just, if it's suboptimal from your current diet, that's where a supplement could be useful. And it'll increase your testosterone, but to the extent by which you could have done it anyways through like good foundational diet principles too. So the only things that really move the needle from what I've seen outside of the dietary, like nutrient, actual mineral, vitamin standpoint is like you have the vitamin D, the magnesium, the zinc. There's something called ashwagandha, which seems to work through kind of like a cortisol downstream response to reducing cortisol levels, which could be transient. I don't know if it's sustainable long term, but it seems to be fairly impactful. But again, not benign. If you take it too long or a high enough dose, you could end up like there's this TikTok trend where people take ashwagandha to feel emotionless. I don't know if you've heard of like
I've seen that.
It's like induces a state of just like apathy if you take it too long at too high of a dose, which is sketchy. So ashwagandha, you know, it could work, but again, this stuff has like a happy medium dose, or I forget what the word is, like the Goldilocks zone or something. Yeah, where it's like effective, but it's also context specific. Because if you're somebody who has like low glucocorticoid output or otherwise has like, I don't know, you're already like on the borderline of like relatively low cortisol as is, and you take ashwagandha, or if you take some of this stuff at the wrong time when you need that cortisol response, like you could be just screwing yourself more. So like, again, these should be treated almost as if they are like borderline pharmaceutical compounds, in my opinion, as far as the knowledge that goes into them, which is why, again, nuanced conversation. Phaedogia agrestis is a very, very, very speculative one that has some interesting literature on how impactful it could be. But again, this is rodent data extrapolated out. So that one needs like a ton of disclaimers on it before you just haphazardly jump on it. And again, is why you should thoroughly educate yourself before you just jump on these products. But Tongkat seems to be one of the most promising, if not the most promising one overarchingly. And then a lot of them are just like total BS and do nothing.
Just like, most garbage.
So.
Well, cool. Well, that pretty much sums up the basics of Tongkat Ali and kind of an overview of testosterone supplements. Derek, as always, man, where can people find you?
More plates, more dates, anywhere on social media. You can check me out. And thanks for having me, man.
You bet.